Hey, so we're back with Brian Kalman. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We just had some issues. The internet connection was poor. I started the live stream from Bulgaria, so don't worry about this. Maybe just had some issues there. So Brian, we'll again just have a little bit of your background because maybe some of the people didn't get the idea. The video is about is going to be about commenting on the feedback that we gotten from the video on why the US military is woefully unprepared for a major conventional conflict, and we'll just start with the comments that we had just beneath the video. So the first comment was from Kyle Benton, and the first comment was, "I love watching civilians who know nothing about military talk about it. It's so funny."
Yeah, well, I hope you guys can all hear me now better. But yeah, I mean, that first comment is, obviously I have a military background. It's been a while, but I have lots of friends that have military backgrounds and friends that don't have military backgrounds, and everybody has an opinion, and everybody should have an opinion as a diligent, vigilant citizen of a country, especially one like the United States, my country, that's involved in conflicts and wars all over the world. I would think that most citizens would have an interest in understanding the military-industrial complex, the military force that the United States can bring to bear, the strengths and weaknesses of it. A lot of Americans have sons and daughters, husbands, brothers, sisters that are in the military. And hopefully all those civilians have become a little bit more educated on the U.S. military in a lot of different respects. And it's also important to point out that it's very important that in most Western democracies, and the United States included, it's the civilian leadership that controls the military. I think that's important because it dilutes the power of the military. If you left decision making up to generals and admirals that are totally absorbed in what they're doing, you might have a more militaristic even attitude, or the United States might be doing some things that would be even worse than what's going on now. I mean, you saw, if you looked at history, Truman recalled MacArthur when he gave him too much power in the Korean War. He was ready to drop nuclear bombs on China.
Stop, Brian, stop. The live stream is like, we're live, but the stream is private. Just a second. Sorry, I'm just cutting you like that, but okay, so we're back with Brian Kalman after the technical difficulties that we faced a few minutes earlier. Thank you for your patience, and now we're going to continue with the first comment that we received, and we're going to comment on. And the first one was from Kyle Benton, and he stated, "I love watching civilians who know nothing about the military talk about it. It's so funny."
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what to say about that. I know there's a lot of armchair generals out there. I'm not one of them. I had a history in the military, 10 years in the Naval Reserve, and also I've spent my entire adult professional career in the Merchant Marine. I actually work with the military in a number of respects even now. So a lot of my good friends are veterans, combat veterans. They're still in the military. They work for the government in intelligence, a number of different government agencies. So, I mean, I would guess that I'm pretty well connected and pretty well informed. I do a lot of research, and I'm very passionate about what I do because I think that I have a point of view that needs to be told, and I think every citizen of every country that cares about what their country is doing in the world, what's going on in the world, should definitely do their own research and become more educated on how the militaries of their countries function, the weapons they have, the capabilities they have, their strengths and weaknesses. And I would say that at least in the United States, with so many people having family members that are serving in the military, and unfortunately in so many different corners of the world, sons and daughters, husbands and wives, and fathers and mothers, that kind of makes people want to educate themselves and find out what's really going on in the world. And so I think that everybody should be interested in commenting on these things. It's not just the place of those in the military. And, I mean, those in the military make a lot of mistakes. I mean, a lot of mistakes have been made from the leadership in the U.S. military on what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya. So, I guess we should trust their point of view more than, somebody else that's saying something a little bit more rational. I don't think so. But I think that the discussion needs to be had. And it doesn't matter if it comes from somebody that served in the military for 20 years and, has commendations and medals out the wazoo or not. It's kind of irrelevant. The important part is that the conversation is happening at all. And, it's up to everybody to contribute. I mean, the world's a dangerous place, and the United States, I don't think, has made it any safer with some of the decisions they've made militarily. And, it's a conversation that's open to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important.
And again, we're live and doing this, and just want to mention shortly that you can leave your comments and leave your questions here on the link that we've provided in the live chat. So you can donate, because we're a crowdfunded project, which depends on your donations, and we'll answer your question for sure if you donate. So just had this in mind. And the second comment that we have comes from Zen Arcade, and he says that love hearing a British accent talking about American readiness for combat. It's quite hilarious. He's probably talking about the voiceover that we had.
I guess so. I mean, I don't really know what to make of that comment. If you go to the mainstream media or you go to the History Channel, it seems like it's always somebody with a British accent talking about, military matters. I don't know if they think that adds gravitas to it or not, but so I don't know why that's an issue. I mean, people often criticize us for having voiceovers where somebody has an accent from, what they would assume Russia or Eastern Europe or something. I don't know. Maybe they want to hear it in quote unquote American English. I don't know. But, I don't think somebody's accent should really have any bearing on what's being said. So, I don't really think that's a very constructive comment.
Okay, and we had a question from Paul Linton, and he said, this report is like propaganda. SouthFront has been a good channel, but this report is not correct. Well,
is it, what kind of propaganda is it? Is he, I don't know, is he saying it's pro-Russian propaganda, it's pro-American propaganda, it's anti-American propaganda, or what? I mean, SouthFront doesn't produce propaganda. I'll just make that clear. We have people that contribute that have many different viewpoints, and basically they want to talk about issues that I think in a lot of times, a lot of ways aren't really discussed by mainstream media or mainstream sources, and they want to get the story out there. My own personal reason for writing the analysis in the first place. It's a topic I've been wanting to discuss for a while. I mean, I started in the military in the late '90s, and especially my background, the Navy, totally different state than it is now. The aircraft carrier air wing was much. It was more varied. It was stronger. You had many different platforms with different strengths and weaknesses that all came together to work well. Whether it was the A-6 attack aircraft, or the F-14 Tomcat, and the F-18. Now that most of those platforms are gone, you have the F-18 that does everything, and it has some strengths, but it has a lot of inherent weaknesses that it brings to the table, and that's something I think that the United States really, really has to focus on is developing the aircraft carrier air wing to be a tool that is stronger. It's more well balanced the way it used to be. And you look at some of the platforms that the Navy's invested all its money in, and it's just a total waste of money. The Army also getting back to a conventional fighting force and away from fighting counterinsurgency and occupation. It was something I thought needed to be talked about. And apparently, I'm not the only one, because it was just a week or two after we did the video.
We were going to show it. Just 2 weeks after that. Yeah, Brian, continue.
Yeah, just a week or two after we had produced the video based on the analysis, that the Congress was given a report, an independent bipartisan report, as they like to call them here in the United States. The National Defense Strategy Commission put a report together that said basically the same thing that we said on SouthFront. It pointed out multiple weaknesses within the U.S. military, and it stated that it was woefully unprepared to fight a conventional conflict with either Russia or China.
So now the only thing
Brian,
that was really conspiracy now. I can see it very well. Maybe you did the report as well. Or you were
the only thing that was really different was the conclusion, where my conclusion was that there was a number of changes that had to be made to rectify the issues, and basically the U.S. government's or the commission's conclusion, I should say, was, you just got to spend more money, increase the budget. As somehow spending more money is going to fix all the problems. And, I think that spending money and wasting money is kind of one of the reasons why we're in the situation we are. But, that's beside the point.
Because you're spending way too much. But we'll get on this topic. But let's first answer most of the questions that we have and most of the comments that we have, because this live stream is all about the people that were commenting on it and just having the clarification on what you wanted to say, what you actually said, and just to fix some minor bug issues from people that didn't get the right idea. So, some Typhoon Naubanatuglu, sorry if I pronounce your name incorrectly. So the question from him is, I bet you'll be banned from PayPal soon. You might want to look into cryptocurrency alternatives. So this is a question probably for me more, comment. So right now, we don't have problems with PayPal. Hopefully we won't have. We had some issues with PayPal some time ago, but PayPal didn't find afterwards any violations from our side. So you can see the story. We will post it in the comments. You see the whole story. But if you want to donate crypto, you can do it. So you can do that as well. So we had a question from Tusk. That's the nickname. Or Patreon might be an option, or make your own donation system on SouthFront.org that works independently like people used to do before sites where PayPal became a thing. So we also have Patreon, so you can use Patreon as well. And now comes a question. It's not really a question. It's a great statement that that we got from Thomas Hansen, and I think that's for you, Brian. Fucking Putin lovers.
Well, if I got a dime for every time I saw a comment about working for Putin or, being a Putin apologist or working for Putin's GRU or whatever, I'd be, a wealthy man, or at least if I took that money and gave it to, in donations to SouthFront, we'd be able to do a lot more work. But, it's just, you're going to have those comments. You're going to have those comments, and you're also going to have comments whenever we write a analysis that's critical of the United States. We're going to be, working for Putin. It's funny. We wrote a very detailed analysis of Russia's maritime strategy, and we were very critical of Russia. And it's funny that nobody had anything to say about that. Were we working for the CIA and making comments like that? Are we working for Trump? So, I mean, you're in our line of work here.
Everyone.
In our line of work here, yeah. I mean, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You're going to have enemies that are going to have something to say about you, and you got to get over it. That comes with the territory. I don't waste any time fretting about comments like that. Actually, they kind of make me laugh.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, it's a funny one. And the next one is from Standard Awi, if I pronounce it correctly. And it stated, SouthFront, I have some doubts about the claims that the U.S. overemphasizes special forces at the expenses of normal units. I mean, that used to be the Russian way of doing this. So I'm not sure whether it could be pointed out by a Russian as a serious weakness. Oh, so you're now a Russian. Okay.
Well, I mean, I think it's beyond a shadow of a doubt that the United States has been putting more emphasis on special operations forces. I mean, just look at the numbers. Look at how much in personnel and in resources those forces have increased in the past, even 4 or 5 years. It's very obvious. I mean, numbers don't lie. And the fact that special operators from the United States are working in, I'd say, 85, 90% of the countries of the world in any week. And on any given day, they're in like 70 different countries doing, we don't even know because it's all top secret. But, the numbers don't lie. There's an obvious overemphasis on special forces from the U.S. military. And it does draw away funding and focus from other more conventional arms, and there's no doubt about that. I mean, just look at how much other assets have suffered from it. I mean, 70% of the F-18s are not flight worthy. Like 70 to 80% of some of the fleets of aircraft in the Air Force aren't flight worthy. We have a shortage of officers in the U.S. Army that are artillery officers because we don't focus on conventional or rocket artillery anymore. I mean, there's definitely an effect there. And I'm not saying that special operations forces aren't important and they don't serve a valuable function in modern combat, but especially when it comes to counterinsurgency. But it's definitely drawing away focus and assets and funding away from other branches, other more conventional forces. And I think I'm not the only one that's saying that. I mean, this report just came out, the official report from the National Defense Strategy Commission. They see that as well. So I'm not the only voice out there saying this. And, I talk to my friends in the military, and it's a fact. It's a reality.
So everybody sees that, but nobody wants to acknowledge that, to be like, yes, that's the truth, or it's maybe being used just as a way to get more money from Congress to pay for the defense budget.
Well, yeah, and I mean, a lot of people like to look at special forces, whether it's the Navy SEALs or the Green Berets or any of the other special operations forces from the other services, or you look at Russian Spetsnaz or any of the other nations' special forces. They train to do things that are unconventional. They're sensational. They're pretty crazy. If you look at the history, it's like wow. It's Hollywood loves it. So it's easy to focus on that and say, oh, we should have these forces because look what they can do, and look at how highly trained they are and motivated they are. And that's true, but special forces don't win wars. Sorry, special operations forces from World War II to the present haven't won a war. They're a force multiplier and they have a function. But it's conventional fighting forces that win the war. So,
and by the way, coming from the answer from your answer right now, here is a question from the live chat, and it's from nanotechnology, biotechnology. That's the nickname. Would we lose a war against North Korea or Iran, Brian?
Well, it all depends on your definition of winning the war. I mean, especially looking at the United States. I mean, in my personal opinion, we haven't won a war since World War II, and World War II was a shared victory. I mean, what war have we won since then? We didn't win the Korean War. That was a stalemate. Vietnam, we never should have fought that war. That was a stalemate. We had to leave. Afghanistan, we're there almost 18 years later doing I don't even know what the point of that is at this point. I don't know if it's we're there to increase the heroin production or to keep the Chinese out because the Chinese are building a base there, and that might be key to the One Belt One Road trade initiative that they're putting together. There's a lot of lithium and cobalt in Afghanistan. There's also building the pipelines. It's centrally strategically located. It's a nexus between Central Asia, Europe, the Middle East. But, we haven't really won a war there. Iraq, we just basically, not only did we level the country, but we turned Iraq into an almost failed state that is more aligned with our enemies, or what Washington sees as our enemies, Iran and Syria, than it is with us or our Sunni allies in Israel in the Middle East. So I really don't know what the victory was there. That war hasn't been won. Libya was a fiasco. All we did was create a failed state there, and it looks like, Russia's probably making more inroads there. Russia and Egypt. And we burned our bridges with Egypt with the Arab Spring there, and, Obama trying to support the president, the short-lived president there that was from the Muslim Brotherhood. So, we haven't won any wars pretty much, in my opinion, since World War II, which I said was a shared victory. It wasn't a U.S. victory alone. So could we win a war in Iran and in North Korea? It would be a Pyrrhic victory. There would be such a horrible cost in material and in lives, both civilian and uniform. I don't think we're going to fight those wars. I think it would be the height of folly to go into an armed conflict in North Korea or Iran. With all the bellicose rhetoric that's been coming out of Washington for decades about how bad North Korea and Iran are. And, I have my issues with both of those regimes, but I have my issues with my own government that they're not innocent. But with all the bellicose rhetoric that's come out for those regimes for decades, what have we really done we haven't gone to war with them. We've tried a number of different ways, at least in Iran, to try and overthrow the government through other means, clandestine means. But no, I don't see us going to war with either one of those countries, and I don't think it would be a winnable victory. There's no good outcome.
Sure, and we have actually one of the comments, and it's a pretty big, large comment. So keep up with me. It's going to take a little while, and it's from Mech Enizer, and he stated, any country has insurgents after a successful invasion and then occupation of another nation. To act like this is a failure of American military is pretty dumb. The truth is that the main goal in Iraq was accomplished in a matter of a few weeks, which is insanely good. US logistics operations are some of the best in the world, and our soldiers some of the best equipped and trained. You're forgetting to mention the UK's role in all of this. The UK was right next to the US during all of this. So if having insurgents is really enough to claim a failure, the UK military has also failed for the same reason. You are acting like the US converted to only be able to deal with insurgents, but the truth is that the US has gained tactic to deal with insurgents, but is still fully capable of some pretty stunning military actions, like taking out Iraq's and Afghanistan's conventional military. Are you the bold guy that has a channel related to history that always sneers whenever he mentions anything to do with the US? You sure sound like him. If so, you should remember why you hate the US so much. The US has saved your nation twice, and you would have been a German citizen if it wasn't for the good people of America. Whenever England is in trouble, it is the US. You come running to help for help. It was American brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, uncles and aunties that sacrificed to save the UK from obliteration. That's it. End of the comment.
All right, yeah. I mean, there was a lot. There was a lot said there. You know, I don't know who the bald guy on the History Channel he's referring to is, but I mean, I'll just try to answer as many of the different questions or comments, or react to the different comments I heard in that very long comment. I mean, yes, the United States has made headway in developing tactics to deal with insurgents, but it hasn't achieved a victory. We're still fighting insurgents in Afghanistan. It's true with the commenter said that, you know, all wars where you fight an occupation, there's going to be an insurgency. That's true. Look at the U.S. Civil War. You go through, you know, World War II. There were Nazi holdouts, the werewolves, that fought for a little while longer than that. You know, but they went away in a few years, a year, 2 years. You know, you don't really fight insurgencies 100% militarily. If you go into a country with no plan on how you're going to provide stability after the battle's fought and during an occupation, you're never going to put down the insurgency, because there's always going to be reasons that people are going to go to fight you. You know, so I don't see the rationale in the commenters' reasoning on, you know, how we've been successful in fighting insurgency, because we're still fighting the insurgencies in Afghanistan 17, almost 18 years later. In Iraq, we never put down the insurgency. We actually had to leave for the most part. You know, we got to a point where the local government was stable enough that they were able to fight some of the Shia militias and Al-Qaeda there. But they're still dealing with issues in Iraq to this day. And, you know, funding an outside insurgency, an invasion in a neighboring country like Syria, and not seeing that it might have an effect on a country that you had previously invaded in Iraq that you were trying to stabilize, is, I don't know how they missed that in the Pentagon. Oh, yeah, let's unsettle Syria with a bunch of Sunni jihadi radicals, and it's not going to have an effect on Iraq? I mean, that was just ridiculous. So, no, I would argue that the United States hasn't really learned much about counterinsurgency and occupation as far as, you know, achieving stability and providing for a country that was more aligned with the United States and the interests of the United States. That's not true in Iraq. It's not true in Afghanistan. And, you know, as far as the comments on the United States military being strong and doing some good things in the world, of course. World War II, we did aid the United Kingdom, and we helped to turn back the fascists, and we ended a horrible regime, in Nazism. That was a shared victory with a number of other states, and that those accomplishments should be celebrated. So yeah, I have relatives that served in the military. I had relatives that served in World War II. I served in the military. I have friends that serve in the military, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for the U.S. military. I do not like how the U.S. military is being used. It's not being used to defend this nation. As an American, I think it's my obligation to say that, and changes need to be made that alter that fact.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can agree with you on this one, and we have a question from Laurent Rugateur. If I'm pronouncing it, I hope I pronounce it okay. Hello guys, thank you for your analysis. My question might not be relevant. I just want to know what the objectives that America is pursuing by surrounding Russia with bases. To attack it?
Well, it's hard to say, if it's eventually to attack it or to undermine the authority of the government, to contain it, to who knows? I'm not I'm not within the government planners there, so I can't say for sure. But if you look at the developments over the past at least since the Soviet Union dissolved, it's obvious that the U.S. military has been surrounding with bases and operations and exercises with NATO, in conjunction with NATO, or even third-party nations. They're obviously pretty much encircling Russia. I think that's pretty obvious, whether it's in Eastern Europe or Western Europe or Central Asia or even China. Increasingly more, we're doing the same thing. So we've identified them as a potential enemy, as an adversary in many different respects, not just militarily. And it's kind of the United States' only tool anymore is to the threat of military force. We're not really good at giving countries alternatives to benefits for working with us or doing things that are in our interests, other than threatening them with war or offering to sell them weapons anymore. You look at China and their One Belt, One Road initiative. At least they're offering economic benefits to a lot of different countries. Increasing infrastructure, increasing quality of life of the people in those countries. I'm not saying that they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They have their own national interest, is the focus of that. But the byproduct is positive for a lot of those countries. And I think the United States could, learn something from that and offer more than either we're going to bomb you or, basically pay us protection money to keep the other people from bombing you. That's pretty much all we do anymore in the world, unfortunately.
Well, yes, and here we have another question from the live chat, and it's from Hazmat. Do you think that the U.S. will invade Venezuela or any other South American nation?
No, well, if you look at the past U.S. involvement in Central and South America, we've been involved in either direct invasions there or supporting elements within those countries that overthrew democratically elected governments. It's something we've been doing for a long time, from the Monroe Doctrine all the way up to the present. I don't think that the United States is going to try and overthrow Venezuela, because I really don't see Venezuela as a huge threat to the United States. You know, I mean, if you look at Venezuela on the world stage as being able to influence um, realities as far as U.S. interests, impeding on U.S. interests, or being a military threat or anything like that, I don't think that they're, you know, I don't foresee the United States trying to militarily overthrow the Venezuelan government. I think, especially with Trump in office, he'll just let them, in his viewpoint, be the bad example. You know, he always points out Venezuela as that bad socialist example, which it is. But you know, it feeds into his,
Into his
you know,
agenda.
his propaganda and his worldview. So he'll just let that simmer there. I don't think he's going to do anything to change the situation.
And actually, I just saw that we have a question from one of the people that have just donated from our live stream, and it's from Gester. And his question is, what happened to the refugee camp turned into death camp by ISIS on the American, quote unquote, American side of the Euphrates? How is it possible for ISIS to flourish in a territory so tightly controlled and monitored by the United States? And by the way, thank you so much for the donation. We solely live, the project lives on people like you. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that question, Victor?
Sure. It's
some
on
input.
you.
Well, I'd say that the United States really doesn't want ISIS to go away. I mean, it was our country working with some other Gulf states that, you know, brought ISIS into being. You know, it serves our interests. So, are the United States directly supporting ISIS? Are they, you know, working with the leadership of ISIS? Are they giving them arms funding? Are they helping them in logistics, you know, support? I don't know. I mean, I can't prove that. I think there's a lot of, you know, about mysterious helicopters moving ISIS commanders around, and nobody can really prove it. There's no definitive proof. But if you just don't focus on, you know, finding definitive proof, but you just look at the big picture, of course, a continued ISIS presence in Syria, it aids the aims of the United States in Syria. At this point, I mean, people ask, you know, why are we even still over there? We obviously, you know, we lost, you know, we're not going to overthrow the Assad government. You know, Russia moved in, stabilized things, brought it back to the status quo. Turkey and Russia are working together now for the most part because they have, you know, in some ways, some interests over there that align. But, you know, if you look at what we're doing now, we're keeping a presence there because we don't want that country stabilized. And which is why we have forces over there supporting the YPG and the SDF. And the more that we have a reason to be there by having ISIS there, you know, it just only helps to justify our troops staying there. So I think that ISIS working around the areas that we control, or we have a, you know, pretty much de facto control over, with our ground forces working with the SDF and also our air forces, kind of a de facto no-fly zone in that little area. We're going to allow ISIS to stay there and fester, and every once in a while come out and do something really nasty so we can say, oh yeah, see, we have to be here. Still a threat. You know, that's part of the game that we're playing there. So unfortunately, yes, I think that no time soon are we really going to, in the areas that we control or we have an influence over, put an end to ISIS. I think that would be against American interests there.
Yeah, because basically what's happening there is ISIS and your troops are preventing the linking between Syria, Iran, and Iraq there. Basically, the Syrian and Iraqi connection is being broken like that, which is limiting their connection. So
yeah, I think it's very
approach. If the U.S. doesn't change that approach, it's just going to be deteriorating the situation by the for the civilians.
Well, I think it's important that you make note of that because, yeah, say we do pull out, and it's only a matter of time before the Assad regime, the Syrian Arab Army, either with probably with the tacit support of Turkey and also Iraq, takes on the SDF and the Kurds, because neither Iraq or Turkey or the Syrian government in Damascus wants a separate Kurdish state that encompasses part of one, two, or all of their states. So as soon as the United States pulls out, they would have a shared common interest, Iraq and Syria and Turkey, on taking on the majority Kurdish SDF and getting rid of them. And because you would have a unified Syria, and then you would have, like you say, a clear, unhindered alliance between Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And then that comes down to the movement of natural gas and oil, and from that area to Europe and other places. And that's something that's kind of one of the main reasons why we got involved in Syria in the first place, or at least funded and supported the, I jokingly say, the insurgency, because it was an invasion by outside proxies. But we've kind of, the situation we're in now, we pretty much caused it. So yeah, I don't see us getting out of Syria anytime soon. And I think us using the convenient excuse or the convenient reason that we're there because ISIS is still a threat, it's just convenient for us.
And I just want to have one of the comments from the analysis. I'm going to take us a little bit back. It comes from a guy with the nickname 4 Touchdowns Al Bundy. So it's a little bit funny. Whoa, the US spends more money than all of the other countries combined in the military. If they're not ready, then who is it? Nobody is it.
Well, I mean, if you're going to equate how much money you spend with how ready and capable your military is, I think you're making a mistake. I mean, just throwing money at a problem doesn't fix the problem, or just throwing money into weapons programs, if they're bad weapons programs, doesn't produce good weapons. A good weapon is supposed to be something that's cheap, efficient, and effective. And I think a lot of these weapons programs that the U.S. defense sector has produced are anything but. So, no, I mean, the amount of money spent does not equate to strength and effectiveness. It's very obvious. I mean, this is a kind of a stretch as far as comparison, but if you look at World War II and you look at, some of the weapon systems used in World War II, if you look at some of the Soviet systems, the T-34 was extremely simple. It was a well-balanced design. It was efficient. It had good armored protection, and it had good firepower. They used the T-34 the entire war. If you look at the Germans, if you look at all the technology and the money, the resources they put into some of their armored designs, like the Tiger, the Tiger II, the Panther, they were so over-designed and they were so high-tech. They were totally inefficient. They required so much maintenance. How much money and influence from the top down, and how much energy and design was put into producing powerful weapon systems that ended up being defeated on the battlefield by something that was much more cheap, simple, and effective.
Yeah, because they were because that has always been the Russian approach when it comes to military. It's having something that is reliable, cheap, and that everyone can use at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the United States back then, the Sherman, the M4 Sherman, it's got its lovers and its critics, but it was efficient. It was easy to produce. It was relatively well balanced as far as firepower and mobility. It didn't have the armor protection of a lot of other tanks, but hey, they produced, and they were able to produce tens of thousands of them. So, It's another good example.
Yeah, so it's not always on how much you spend and how complex your technologies are. It's on how practical they are when it comes to the modern warfare at the current time. So moving into another question, and it's actually very much related to the Khashoggi killing. Vince Dimos asks us, do you suppose that the petrodollar agreement between the Saudis and the US in 1973 is the reason for all the wars in the Muslim countries? Every war since that time has been against Saudis' quote-unquote enemies.
Well, I think that's probably an oversimplification. But, you know, Victor, you and I were kind of talking about this briefly before, you know, getting ready to do the live stream. I think it's definitely, if you look at the Trump response or the U.S. government response to the Khashoggi killing, and, you know, it's apparently, you know, we don't know for sure because, you know, we don't have access to physical evidence and everything else, but apparently it looks like the Saudi royal family, the prince, had Khashoggi killed in the embassy. And, you know, if that's true, and it most likely is, it's, you know, it's horrible. I would like to say that governments all over the world do that kind of stuff every day, unfortunately. And it shouldn't surprise anyone that the Saudi government would do something this heinous. I mean, looking at things they've done in the past, and they do every day. But that being said, what American president, in light of the agreement that we have with Saudi Arabia, where basically the gold backing of the dollar was replaced by petroleum, what American president is going to go on TV and call out the Saudi royal family for, you know, murdering a journalist in cold blood? And it's just never going to happen. They're never going to denounce the Saudis because of that reason. I mean, let's say Trump went on the TV and said, yeah, you know, we know the crown prince is guilty of this and it's horrible and we're not going to support the Saudi government anymore. We're not going to trade arms anymore. What is the royal house of Saud going to do? They're going to go to OPEC and they're going to say, okay, we can trade, let's trade crude oil in any currency our buyers want to. And there's plenty of other members in OPEC that don't have a good relationship with the United States and been wanting to get away from the petrodollar for years, that would jump on that bandwagon in a heartbeat. So there goes the reserve currency status for the U.S. dollar, and that would destroy the monetary policy, the economy of the United States. I would say overnight would be an exaggeration, but it wouldn't take too long. And, you know, so everybody knows that it doesn't matter if it was Obama or Clinton or Trump or, you know, any U.S. president, they're not going to ever call out the Saudis and ruin that relationship. You know, we made that deal with the devil back in the 70s, thanks to Nixon. And, you know, another cliche, we made our bed, we got to lie in it. So, no, you're never going to see that happen. And it was not a surprise to me at all, Trump's comments. I mean, I couldn't see him doing anything different.
Yeah, because there's interest before anything else. So, we have a question from Aniket Ghosh, and it's any updates from Idlib apart from the ceasefire violations? I would take this one. And there are no major right now developments going on out there. The general news about the situation and the maps can be found on our website, SouthFront.org. So feel free to do so. But right now, there are no major developments. If there's anything, we will keep you updated. And here is another question for the stream. Just give me a second. It's for your analysis. It's from the comments that we received. So I have to ask. It's coming from Last Gleaming. So I have to ask: what country is woefully prepared for a major conventional war? Rust Bucket Junkyard Russia, Cartoon Harbor Frigate China, Dead Broke Plywood Send PVC Iran, medieval rocket man or civilian murdering Syria? Who? I don't know what all this fake news is about. Trump demonstrates the accuracy of 168 Tomahawks, more than all the caliber on Rust Bucket ships. Showed the world a non-stop practice run from Montana to North Korea by two B-2 nuclear-armed bombers undetected or escorted by any nation. Okay, I'm not going to even continue. Do you want to take this? Do you want to get a take on this one?
Well, I think what the commenter is trying to state is that the United States military is still by far the most powerful military in the world, which I totally agree with. I don't think you could make an argument otherwise. But in my analysis, I was just pointing out that there are major weaknesses in the U.S. military, and they've exacerbated over the past few decades. And those problems, those shortcomings, those weaknesses need to be rectified. That was the point. So, if you want to say, okay, is Russia ready for a major conflict? Is China ready? Who's more ready than the United States military? I would say that probably none of them really are ready for a major world war, because I don't think any of them really want one. But if push came to shove, I think that Russia has a certain qualitative edge, but they're quantitatively, they're well below the United States. They don't have enough capital assets and their Navy. They don't have enough aircraft. They don't have enough of the really good stuff that they've produced in the past 2 decades. But I don't think that the United States is willing to go into a conventional conflict with Russia because of the qualitative edge that they do have. I think it would just be disastrous for the United States. I mean, part of the reason why the U.S. military is looked at as being so powerful is because they've never faced a really powerful adversary. I mean, part of the power of the U.S. military is the projection, or the idea that it's all powerful. It can't be countered. And if they were to go into a conventional conflict with China in the South China Sea, or with Russia, say in Syria or the Ukraine, something were to kick off at one of those flashpoints, that illusion would be totally destroyed in a matter of, the first day. Yes, Russia has the ability to shoot down U.S. cruise missiles and aircraft, and all the way up to the most modern we have. I mean, it's true, and the United States is not gonna make that fact known to the world by doing something stupid and going into a shooting war with Russia. And the same can be said for China. I mean, China's advancements, its naval modernization, its advancements with missile technology, aircraft, radars, modern radar systems, photon detection. China also, if the United States got into a shooting war, would take a heavy toll on the United States military, the aircraft and the Navy assets that would be called in to fight that war. I mean, what would happen if an aircraft carrier battle group was destroyed? Something that the world apparently thinks is impossible. What would the United States do? It's important to note that there's only one shipyard in the entire United States that has the capabilities of even producing an aircraft carrier. So, it's not like an aircraft carrier is something that we can replace over a short period of time like we could, say, in World War II. Times have changed, technology changes, warfare changes. You can't just bounce back from something like that. And if China or Russia shows that the undefeatable U.S. military is in fact defeatable, that changes a lot of things in the world, And, it's important to point out that China and Russia don't have to say, destroy an aircraft carrier. All they have to do is make it disable it to the point where it can't conduct operations. You know, you look at the Chinese development of some of their anti-ship ballistic missiles, and those missiles don't have to destroy a carrier outright. All they have to do is disrupt carrier operations to the point where the carrier's not fulfilling its function.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, then the entire linchpin of, you know, U.S. power projection in the world, the aircraft carrier, becomes pointless. So I don't think the United States is stupid enough, or I say the United States, the people, the elites, the establishment that is making the decisions in the United States. I don't think they're stupid enough to even go down that road. Which is why, if you
I hope so.
If you look at U.S. If you look at U.S. foreign policy and all their, you know, dealings recently in the world, where it came to Syria or Ukraine, it was all underhanded ways of trying to change reality on the ground. You know, we funded to the tune of $5 billion different groups within the Ukraine that were against the government, that were going to toe our line, whether they were neo-Nazis or the mafia oligarchs. We didn't seem to care, and we went that route. You know, we undermined the country through nefarious means. The same thing with Syria. You know, we armed these outside jihadis to go in there and totally destroy the country, kill 500,000 people. We didn't go in militarily.
Hey, Brian,
So,
Brian,
you know,
just a second, because again, I cannot hear you that well. Can you repeat just the last sentence again?
I was just saying that I don't think the United States is looking at.
Again, we're having a little difficulties when it comes to hearing you well. Just let's try again. Let's just try right again in a second. Guys, just be patient a little bit. Sometimes this happens. It's a live stream, so we might have some difficulties reconnecting with Brian.
Hello, Victor.
Hey, Brian. Can we hear you again? Hey, Brian. I will call Brian once again. If not, I will go over some of the technical questions that we had, and just so that we can get Brian on the line. And until that happens, I just wanna see some of the questions that we have right now. Brian.
Hey, hello, Victor. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
All right.
Okay, perfect. So you were finishing that question about why the U.S. will not go into a bigger conflict. And there was actually a question from Firefox, and he stated, as for someone who spent years in political science and social psychology, I will make this as clear as I can. The United States will, quote unquote, never lose a major war because they are willing to use nukes if that comes to the point. This was as true for Kennedy as it is for Trump. The most likely battleground has always been Europe, although this is arguable. The fact that billions will die is not even a concern because, quite frankly, we are quite expendable. So the question here I see is why the nuclear war scenario was not addressed in your analysis.
I think that wasn't the point of the analysis. You know, I can do another analysis taking a look at, you know, the change in U.S. Nuclear doctrine. I did a analysis a number of years back on the state of the U.S. nuclear triad, but, you know, that's a totally different topic. I mean, you know, we can all say that conventional warfare becomes pointless once nuclear weapons are used, obviously. But, that wasn't the point of the analysis. Russia also has a robust nuclear deterrent, and so does China. So does that mean that there's not going to be conventional conflicts in the future? Obviously not. I mean, the United States first used nuclear weapons in 1945, and nuclear weapons have proliferated since then. I mean, how many countries have nuclear weapons now? Quite a few. That's a worrying thought, but there's still conventional conflicts and different conflicts that go on in the world. New ones, unfortunately, it seems like every other year, and it's not going to stop warfare. Is it going to get to the point where we're going to have a nuclear exchange? I sure hope not. I mean, it could happen. There have been times in the past, looking at the Cold War, where it almost happened because of mistakes that were made. So hopefully not. I mean, I think that's one of the things that a lot of us are scared of with what's going on with Syria and the Ukraine, these flashpoints in the South China Sea, where you have these major powers that have conflicting interests. And the more that the conversation turns to bellicose statements and belligerence, it's kind of unsettling. And I think at least during the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States, as much as they put their own ideologies and own ways of life out there as the superior model, and they might have problems with one another ideologically and another different number of different fronts, they still had good communication. The lines of communication were open. They didn't vilify each other's leadership. I don't remember Khrushchev calling Kennedy or Reagan, the reincarnation of Hitler, like we apparently love to do about Putin, which I think is extremely counterproductive and scary, because once you start looking at your enemy as this kind of a non-human, evil, demonic force, you start to kind of leave the realm of reality, and it makes it makes working together when you have to, and having conversation that prevents conflict in a time that's probably even more dangerous than the Cold War in a lot of ways. There's a lot more nuclear weapons in a lot more hands now than there were back then. It's just counterproductive. So yeah, I don't think that we're going to have a nuclear war anytime soon, hopefully. But we're definitely going to have more conventional warfare. I mean, that's just going to happen. It's happened since the nuclear weapon was the nuclear bomb was invented. We haven't used one since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, thank God. But we sure have had a lot of wars since then.
So we have a question from the man, and it's not a question, but a comment from the video, a little bit of criticism. The video failed to mention that the US is one of the most experienced military forces in the world today. China didn't participate in any major conflicts in decades, and Russia just started very recently.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. If you look at China, I think it's one of their main weaknesses is they don't have experience in modern warfare. They don't have a cadre of soldiers and sailors and airmen that have actually had combat experience, and that's a major weakness. Russia, I think, that's one of the major benefits, if you can call it that, that's come out of their interdiction in Syria, is that you have airmen and you have soldiers and sailors that have experience now, and they have learned a lot. I mean, they've taken away a lot of important lessons, and you can drill and exercise and train as much as you want, but it does not replace real experience on the battlefield. When you look at the United States military, we by far have the most combat experience. But you also have to look at the fact that a lot of those experienced men soldiers, NCOs, officers, they've gotten out of the military. They're gone. Retention in all services of the U.S. military is at all-time lows. So a lot of that experience is gone, and that's a major weakness that the U.S. military branches have acknowledged themselves. A lot of those guys are long gone. They served 5, 6 tours or more in some cases, and if they survived, they got out. They came home, and they're back to
So it's
trying to
irrelevant. So it's basically
live a
irrelevant,
normal
Ryan.
life.
Because we can then
Well,
state about the Chechen wars in Russia, because then we can state about the short but very important when it comes to logistics war in 2008 in South Ossetia between Russia and Georgia. And we can then state the same, yet the people that fought in those wars are not the people that are right now in the militaries of both Russia or the US when it comes to their recent wars. Because most of the Iraqi veterans from 2003, 2004, etc., they're most probably not in the army right now today. Or a very short, limited percentage of them have stayed.
And I think if you look at Russia's experience, it's relatively recent, and they were very good about rotating people in and out because they wanted as many people to get experience as they could, but they also didn't want to overwork them. They didn't want to burn them out. Where if you look at the U.S. military, and you have men and women serving multiple tours back to back to back to back. I mean, you're wearing them out, and which is why they're leaving. And you have a lot of troops that come home, and they have they're suffering from PTSD. They have economic.
I was going to talk about it. Most of the people coming back, I mean, they have so many mental problems that they cannot even function properly in their life.
I mean, they have psychological challenges. They have physical challenges if they were injured. They have economic challenges when they come home and they're trying to find a job and get back into a normal way of life. So yeah, I mean, there's been that's another issue that the U.S. military is dealing with is attrition. I mean, there's been so much attrition. It pretty much took an entire generation of men and women in the military and chewed them up and spat them out. I mean, it's sad, and it's in a lot of ways the government doesn't really seem to care. So in a lot of ways, that experience and the fact that so many people got out or so many people were harmed through that experience is really more of a weakness than anything else. In the U.S. military, because we've been in a state of war for 17, almost 18 years now. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many men and women have gone through that system and gone in and out of deployments, and where are they at now?
Maybe hundreds of thousands. Maybe you can
without a doubt.
Yeah,
without a doubt.
And so another large, long comment, and it comes from Gonçalo Rebelo. Disagree 80%. This video shows a lot of true information, but is misguiding in its analysis. US's and its allies' defense doesn't consist of traditional warfare, quote unquote, only. Its ability to reach far beyond its national borders was incredibly underrated. The ability to conduct surgical bombings and occupation is quite unique. Aircraft carriers won't be used against Russia and China like in World War II to be targeted by cruise missiles. Stealth technology forces the enemies to adapt all their hardware. Obviously, it's not an investment to fight insurgents. Although its effectiveness is quite questionable, so are the enemy jets focused on performance against modern missiles. 2/3 of the US jets are not ready. But so what? It has twice the number any other nation has, and no one has many jets ready. The thing is, missiles and drones have grown to the main threat to all expensive equipment, but they can't fight wars alone. M113s are still operational and are terrible, but they would only be used in a scenario where the US is invaded, which won't happen because no other nation in the world can do it, even if they manage to completely defeat the US in a conventional all-out war.
Well, I think this comment too is, it tries to look at things beyond the scope of the analysis. I mean, I could have taken a much broader view and looked at cyber warfare and, intelligence, collecting assets and, the satellites we have and the ability to shoot down satellites and what, the warfare that's going to take place in space. And there's so many, if you look at modern warfare now, I was looking at, our conventional ability. That's what I was focused on. That's a much, much, much broader conversation. That's a much broader analysis that would have to be had. As far as the United States having, numerically more assets, I agree that qualitatively the United States has a huge edge over any other adversary. But, a qualitative edge doesn't always, equal victory. And it definitely would not equal victory in a shooting war between Russia or China. I mean, like I said, all China or Russia would have to do is take out a number of capital assets and make it extremely painful for the United States in a conventional war. Would the United States finally prevail? I don't think anybody would finally prevail, because if it got to a point where the United States was attacking Russian assets, military assets on Russian soil, that would escalate to a nuclear war immediately. And the same would be said for China. I think a conventional conflict, if it were to happen, and it's very unlikely, but it's increasingly possible in the current geopolitical environment in these flashpoint areas like Ukraine and Syria and the South China Sea. If you did have a conventional conflict in one of these areas, it would be, I think, both players involved or whatever adversaries were involved that would try to keep it as limited in scope as possible, because they wouldn't want it to escalate to a nuclear war. That being said, any conventional conflict between nuclear armed powers could easily escalate to a nuclear war. I think that the United States has very few good options in the South China Sea. I think they realize that. I think China's crossed the Rubicon there as far as establishing their ability to control the South China Sea, and I don't think the United States has a good scenario for changing that, at least in the short term. And as far as a conflict, a conventional conflict with Russia in Syria, as one example, I don't think that the United States, the costs really don't outweigh the benefits. I talked to the Saker about this quite a bit, and we looked at what's happened there over the past few years, and there were the missile strikes and the possibility of escalation there between Russia and the United States. I mean, if the United States had targeted Russian assets, which they obviously didn't, in their missile strikes, and it escalated to a shooting war between Russia and the United States, there's no doubt that Russia had the capabilities, limited as they were, but it had the capabilities there to shoot down U.S. aircraft, which would have caused casualties, and there would have been casualties on both sides. I don't think in their calculus that the U.S. military planners were willing to entertain that scenario. And thank God they weren't, because it could have quickly escalated to something that could have possibly escalated to a nuclear exchange, and then we wouldn't be here having this conversation.
Well, Brian, we have a few more comments to talk on, and one of them is coming from. Let me just see, and it's coming from Heart of Iron RGF, and it is about no one is really prepared for a quote-unquote major conventional conflict, which is also the biggest reason why there haven't been one in 80 years. Quite frankly, I like to keep the streak going. So the question, the, I think that the person believes that there will be no conventional conflict. However, the situation in Eastern Europe and the Middle East was very tense in the past few years, and the US is involved there. What do you think? Will there be a conventional conflict?
Well, I agree with the commenter that I'm glad that we haven't had a major, like on the scale of a world war in 80 years. That's great. I mean, it is something to be thankful for. But I do believe that the possibility exists for a major conflict, or at least a conventional conflict between major powers. It gets increasingly more probable as time goes on, and we have issues of tension in Europe and the Middle East, and now in Asia. You have the national interests of these most powerful players in the world that are coming into conflict. And if you look at the past, it's only a matter of time before, if they don't sit down at a negotiating table and work out these issues, and they increasingly use more and more bellicose language in addressing these issues, and they don't communicate, the possibility exists. I think it's most likely that the possibility exists for a mistake. You have, if you look at these NATO drills that have been going on increasingly in size along Russia's borders, you had I think it was the Spanish aircraft that accidentally fired an air-to-air missile.
Oh yeah, it was right there in Estonia, I think, or somewhere in the Baltics, right?
Yeah, and you had these interdictions of reconnaissance aircraft in the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea. What happens if somebody makes a mistake and there's an air-to-air collision, or somebody does fire a missile by accident? If you look years ago when the Chinese aircraft, the fighter aircraft, interdicted a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft in southern China, and there was a collision, and the Chinese pilot was killed, and the U.S. aircraft had to land on Hainan Island, and that was a huge, international incident. And at the time in Southeast Asia, and we didn't even have the level of conflict between the United States and China at that time as we do today. So it's not that more so that we're going to have a planned fight, but the more that you start to be adversarial and you have these issues like we had in the Cold War, you have this brinkmanship, and you have military forces increasingly meeting each other in the air and on the sea, whatever fashion, the chances that you're going to have a mistake that could lead to something bigger increase and increase and increase the more that we go down this road. And I think that's that's a major problem, a big threat that we're facing today. I mean, we all need to just ratchet it back. China and Russia and the United States, and they just need to walk back the rhetoric, and they need to just walk back some of this stuff. This increasing trade war between the United States and China, and the military rhetoric going back and forth in the South China Sea is not helping. You can't escalate and escalate and escalate and then think nothing's going to happen. It's just a matter of time before something happens, and it's going to be an accident that probably starts it.
Mm-hmm.
That's my point of view.
And it's sometimes accidents and like some wars happen because of something stupid, quote unquote stupid, and a mistake. Some wars happen like that. Some do not. Some happen by a mistake that was calculated mistake, a planned provocation which was masked as a mistake. So we have another long comment, and it's coming from Jared Rotter. The strength of the U.S. military is not just in its physical combat resources. Their geographical reach around the globe is vast. The U.S. has over 750 military bases in 70 countries, many of which are nations of people who have commented negatively about the US on this forum, but enjoy the security the US military brings to their countries and economies. I don't think anyone can deny the corporations have had this effect on military spending, but that's worldwide. The US can recover and rally better than any other country in the world because of the network it has spent decades creating. The discussion regarding major powers wars is silly. All the world powers benefit from proxy wars, not direct conflicts with a major power. It's bad for business, and the one takeaway from the video that is undeniable is that business of fighting wars is a good business. So Brian, I'm going to leave you on commenting a little bit more about it, and I will come in just a second.
Well, I mean, the business of fighting wars is good business for those involved in that business. It's not good for anybody else. I mean, there's a lot of money wrapped in it. So, yeah, it benefits Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and all the BAE and all those companies. I also would argue that since the United States and NATO have expanded, you know, they can say it's made those member states or those countries that host U.S. military installations more secure. But I don't think that really, it doesn't really equate. Just because they haven't had, they haven't been invaded, or I mean, I don't think anybody thinking rationally would believe that Russia has any desire to invade the Baltic states or Western Europe or Central Asian countries that either were never part of the Soviet Union or were at one point. I don't think that anyone really thinking rationally would say that that would be in Russia's interest. So to say that those countries that have joined NATO, whether they were part of the former Warsaw Pact or independent, are more secure now is irrelevant. I don't think there's really any way to quantitatively prove that. So, you know, I would disagree with that comment. I think in a lot of ways, NATO's growing power has made the world less secure. I mean, it was NATO that went into the Baltic states and broke apart Yugoslavia and all the things that happened as a result of that, and there's still repercussions to this day. It was NATO that went into Libya and bombed that country into a failed state. That was a NATO operation. So just because the warfare hasn't happened in Europe doesn't mean that NATO hasn't taken war to other parts of the world and made the security situation in those countries and in the countries neighboring them worse. And I'm sure Egypt is not very happy that NATO bombed the hell out of Libya, and you know, now they're dealing with the repercussions of the problem. So you know, I would not agree that the United States expanding as an empire across the world militarily has made the world more secure. I mean, if anything, we're at this crossroads now where the U.S. military has basically encircled two other very influential and powerful countries, Russia and China, where now it's coming to a head. So, no, I would wholeheartedly disagree with the fact that the United States imperial expansion, what Dick Cheney called Pax Americana, has made the world a safer place or a more secure place. And, you know, this business of war, this never-ending business of war, where hundreds of thousands to millions of people have been killed over the past few decades to the tune of profits for a handful of companies and their shareholders, I don't think that's a positive thing. You know, you can say that, yeah, war is good business, but it's only good for those that are collecting the money.
Yeah,
it's not good for the soul.
Lockheed Martin will just not survive without wars.
And I think, you know, if you look back and you were talking about America and their record in winning wars, I don't think America wants to win wars. America wants to fight wars. It wants to perpetuate wars. It wants to keep wars going and going and going and going. Because the companies that make the bullets and the bombs those bullets and bombs have to be used so that more bullets and bombs can be made. I mean, that the whole comment that the United States, wins wars or doesn't win wars misses the fact that the United States doesn't care about winning wars. It cares about fighting wars. That's what keeps the whole system going.
And I think that with this one, we'll move to the last comment that we are going to address today. And it's coming from the Best the World Has to Offer channel. And the comment is, the LCS is not a failure just because it doesn't do a destroyer's mission. Can any destroyer spring at 50 knots? Change its sensor and armament payload within days or flexibility? House as much helicopters, air and sea drones and boats and have space for special forces? Do all of that with a small crew? LCS has maybe the best anti-submarine and counter-mine system in the world. They already plan to, but some kind of robust anti-ship missile. So LCS can contribute if the situation is dire, but LCS was designed for all of the other missions.
Well, I think that the commenter must be reading a brochure from Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman about how wonderful the LCS is. But yes, I mean, that's what the LCS was. That was the concept, but it has proven to be an utter failure in meeting all those specifications. It hasn't met one of them. And as far as the anti-submarine warfare capabilities, I mean, it hasn't met any of those requirements. It's funny, I have a classmate that I just saw this summer at my 20-year reunion at school, and he's one of the, I don't know if he's a project engineer for Northrop Grumman on LCS program, or he's an engineer at the shipyard working on it. But, I've talked to him, and a number of my friends have talked to him about how shitty that ship is, how horrible it is. And, he defends it and defends it and defends it. And he's like, well, we can work these problems out. We're working on fixing that problem. His issue, I think, is it was far too much was asked of the design in the first place. And I agree. I mean, for a ship that has a displacement closer to a Corvette, or somewhere between a frigate and a Corvette, to think it could do all those things better than a multi-purpose frigate, I think was utter folly. I mean, it doesn't meet any of the requirements that the design specification put forward. It just doesn't at this day. And I mean, how many vessels have we put into the class already, and it still doesn't meet specs? It doesn't have any major offensive capability at all. I mean, it doesn't have a VLS. It doesn't have an anti-ship missile capability. It can't fire cruise missiles, or a very limited number. It has a small deck gun. It has, close-in defense capabilities. And I mean, they found early on that it was susceptible to attack by small boats. If it was swarmed by small boats, like the Iranians use, it would be defeated. And so, what was the answer? Oh, well, instead of using a off-the-shelf, in close defense against small targets, let's develop the Hellfire missile into a short-range anti-ship missile. And it's got a range of 8 miles? I mean, if that ship came into conflict with any other major combatant, it wouldn't survive. It wouldn't survive a surface exchange with another frigate, or even if you look at some of Russia's small corvettes or China's. I mean, they have anti-ship capability. They have cruise missile capability that the LCS can't bring to bear. And defend against air attack. They have very limited anti-air air war capabilities. So I don't really see the point of dumping the amount of money that the Navy did into making this little ship that really can't do anything well. They should have taken the money and put it into Arleigh Burke class destroyers and, updating that ship, which is a great ship. Or what they're doing now, thank God, a little belatedly, is developing a multi-purpose frigate, which they should have done in the first place. But the defense contractors that the big Northrop Grummons and Lockheed Martins and all that talked the military into it. Oh yeah, we have this wonderful wonder weapon, and they sold them on it, and it turned out to be a dud. It's a fiasco.
Well, of course.
So
yeah, continue. Sorry for
so yeah,
interrupting
I totally wholeheartedly disagree with that comment that the LCS is this great ship. And I mean, the first key that should have tipped everybody off that this wasn't a great idea was the Navy picking two separate designs to fulfill one class's requirement and all the inherent problems that came along with that. I mean, how can you have a naval combatant that's hulls made out of aluminum? Or, this light steel alloy that, the armored protection there is minimal. They're also having issues with corrosion because of dissimilar metals being put together between the hull and the propulsion systems in salt water. I mean, it's just nobody thought of this. It's just a fiasco. It's an utter embarrassment for the Navy, in my opinion.
Oh, just another stealing of money in a legal way, probably.
Yeah, you can look at it that way too, Victor.
Yeah, because
a lot of taxpayers' money down the drain.
Oh, sure, because that's a project. It failed in some way. We have something done as a. It's more than just a prototype, but we have something like that, which you can see. Well, it's not perfect, but we can make a mistake. But we've already gotten all the money out of that.
I mean, if I don't know how to better say it, the fact that these LCS ships and the Zumwalt are failures, than the fact that the military itself has said, instead of the 50 we were planning to build out, we're only going to build 26. And instead of the 30 we're going to build out, we're only going to build 3. I mean, that should say enough right there. I mean, there's not enough money, and the vessels are utter disappointment. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're just going to say, well, some of the projects will fail, which is true, but they fail for different reasons. Okay, Brian, I just want to thank you. I cannot thank you enough for covering all of the comments today. This is going to be the last comment that we are going to have a take on. And for the audience, first, thank you for your patience because of our technical problems. Thank you for joining us today. Just want to have a few reminders. If you like this format, we can hold the live streams of that kind more regularly. Also, we have expanded our production of various maps, which you can see on our website. And also, please note that the month is going to its end and we are a crowdfunded project. So all of your donations matter and we, the project, are solely dependent on you. So having all of this in mind, thank you, Brian, for joining us. Thank you for your analysis and thank you for having the patience, time and energy to answer all of the, or at least some of them, because we cannot answer all of the comments because there were more than 3,000, but just having the patience and energy to have a take on and have a discussion with the audience. So thank you for everyone who joined the live chat, and I hope to see you and hear from you very soon.